Alright, welcome back to the second chapter. We're looking at research ethics. Ethics are quite an interesting concept, besides the fact that it's just a generally intellectually and academically interesting topic to consider. Research ethics weren't such a big issue until about 10 years ago. As an academic, as a professor, one could just decide on research that one wanted to do. One could simply get a proposal approved and then proceed to collect the data. But these days, if you want to proceed with research, in an academic context that is, you'll have to get an ethical clearance certificate before you can proceed. And that to a large extent has been mirrored in the private sector, where ethics are paramount in the way business is conducted generally, and with marketing research specifically. So obviously, as an academic, we like definitions. Starting off with definitions, ethics is the set of principles or rules and norms that of conduct for correct behavior. So in this case, we're looking at the ethical behavior. So it's moral behavior. Once again, morals and principles that guide it. It's really broader than legal laws of society. It's not necessarily a law, but it's more what is generally accepted. And that's really what ethics is. And we have to obviously apply this in the whole of the marketing research process. So ultimately, the objectives is to protect participants, which makes a lot of sense. They are in a sense got no real stake in the research. They're really just assisting us, so we need to look after them. Make sure that the process, as I mentioned earlier, is conducted in a way that doesn't compromise the interests of the respondents, and to ensure the ethical soundness of the research process. If you think about, for example, people going and putting pressure on respondents to participate, well, it sounds a little bit crazy, doesn't it? But if you can imagine someone doing research, perhaps yourselves, you're busy with a master's thesis or an honors thesis, and you have to collect this data, and you say, come on guys, I need you to do this, and you put pressure on them. That's obviously not acceptable, number one. But number two, it might compromise the validity and reliability of your research, because people will just be participating in it just to basically get you off their back. So that could compromise, as I said, the soundness of the research process, and and to a certain extent, and to use the term loosely, invalidate the results of your research. So that's another reason, besides protecting the respondents, why one should really practice ethical practices when doing marketing research. So just to reiterate why ethical research is important. Okay, as I've said, it promotes the aims of the research. Values such as trust, accountability, and respect and fairness. In any business, those are going to be important. There obviously are some businesses which don't follow those principles, and we probably read about them or hear about them on TV virtually every day at the moment. And certainly researchers need to be held responsible and accountable for their behavior. There are broader aspects, not just the way you speak to and the way you treat your respondents, but also the human rights. We don't really deal with animals as such in the social sciences, but certainly if you trying to do research into animals or perhaps their behavior, you have to have their welfare and their rights to mind as well. And importantly, just a practical perspective, from an academic perspective, if you don't practice ethical research as an academic, you won't receive funding. And if you are a business research or marketing research practitioner and your behavior is unethical and it gets out, certainly nobody is really going to brief you for any more business. So there are practical and pragmatic reasons why one should conduct marketing research in an ethical manner. Looking at codes and policies of ethics research, as I said, it's a set of principles and procedures. You can put that in an organization. At Fort Hare we've got a ethical conduct practice in terms of how we go about doing research, how we go about collecting data specifically, and we have to comply with certain requirements before we can go out and do it. And that could include, say, for example, a whole lot of fairly obvious things, but nevertheless, integrity, being honest, looking after humans. I mentioned animal care earlier. Clearly you can't do anything that's illegal or discriminates against people, and one needs to take a certain amount of social responsibility when going about it, and clearly you need to keep the information confidential. So typically you wouldn't disclose the names of any of the respondents, and in an application, certainly at Fort Hare, for conducting research, one would make sure that you disclose how you are going to protect the data. So just looking at some of the principles of research ethics, respect. Clearly one needs to respect people, one needs to make sure that one looks after the welfare, and treat people in a fair and equitable way. So if you are interviewing people and people are lining up and waiting, you would make sure that you deal with people probably in a fair and equitable manner, rather than saying, oh, there's my mate, let me pull him out first, I know he's busy, pull him out and let me just interview him first. So that's an important consideration as well. Participants or respondents, a lot of emphasis is placed on them, and with good reason as well, because they're most exposed to perhaps abuse or being treated unfairly. So these are some of the factors that one needs to consider. One has to be careful about deception. Okay, you need to provide your respondents with the correct information. So deception would take place, as I've said there, where participants are provided with the incorrect information. So if it's going to take, say for example, half an hour, then you need to disclose to the participants that it's going to take half an hour, but not get them in there and say it's going to take half an hour and it actually takes 2 hours. So you need to make sure that you on top of that. An important consideration, and it's probably the most foremost consideration which people or researchers have to think about and incorporate into the process, is informed consent. So when the respondent agrees to participate in the research, they need to understand the full implications of what it is going to be for them. So the onus is on the researcher to disclose the the full implications of participating in the research. Okay, when approaching respondents, one needs to do so in a considerate and respectful way. You can't harass people. One sometimes has or have people phoning you up or sending you emails asking you to participate in research, which is fine, no problem with that. But sometimes I wonder, if I get a third or fourth email from one, if that doesn't constitute some sort of form of harassment. So one needs to be mindful of that, and also one needs to respect their right to withdraw. So if you're halfway through perhaps an interview, then you need to respect the right of the interviewee to say, actually, look, I'm not really that comfortable with this research. Can I please withdraw, and let them go with good grace, rather than start sulking or making some sarcastic comments. Typically, one would expect that after the research has been completed, that one would give some sort of feedback to the respondents, in other words, debriefing. Clearly, and I've mentioned before, the participant has a right to privacy, confidentiality. I've also mentioned that for all possible steps must be taken to protect the participants' confidentiality. Lastly, conflict. There can be a certain amount of animosity which may emerge during the process. Perhaps the guy's not giving you the answers that you're really expecting, or perhaps in a focus group you've got somebody who's being disruptive and trying to be funny, or trying to disrupt the process, I've said, and although it seems perhaps a long stretch to say there can be animosity in the research process, it could well be that emerges. You're frustrated, you're tired, and this is the last focus group that you're doing, and somebody's being difficult. So you need to kind of really keep your composure and try and minimize that. Talking about informed consent, the way one ensures this, and anonymity, one normally gives the participants a document explaining the research objectives, the role of the participant in the research, how confidentiality of the participant will be ensured, potential risks, how you're going to try and minimize the risk as the researcher, and one really expects that the participant should give their consent in writing, and obviously no pressure should be placed on the respondent. Okay, I think that's about it for ethics. There's quite a good chapter in your book, and the expectation is obviously, as I said to you right at the beginning, that you'll read that book, you'll read this chapter, you'll study this chapter. So this lecture is really just to try and highlight some aspects, to try and give you some sense of context, to try and give you some sort of local context and about this. So thank you, and looking forward to the next section. Okay, well, that's the end of chapter 5. We'll be moving on to chapter 6 shortly. Look forward to seeing you there.